We live in a world of duality. And if we're seeing that the world is really in super crisis, of course, the other end of that rope is these people who have these extraordinary gifts, which in it is amazing connection.
We need to either be the visionaries or raise the visionaries. And I think psychedelics find its place over here as a revelatory, visionary force that can actually accelerate this process.
Part of our job is to help manifest the future human. And when we go into these liminal spaces, this is where we can imagine the future human, the future ideas, draw them down and bring them into the real world.
Welcome, friends, new and old, to this powerful episode that was recorded at Breaking Convention in Exeter this spring. Breaking Convention is a multidisciplinary conference on psychedelic consciousness featuring more than 200 presenters from around the world. I am delighted to be part of this vibrant community dedicated to the understanding of psychedelics. During Breaking Convention, I gathered 6 extraordinary speakers to join me for this podcast circle. We love sharing these circles on All That We Are, as they feature the voices of many and tell a collective story of this time. As always, if you find what we offer here at All That We Are supportive, please dive deeper with us. You can find out on our website how to join The Rhythm, our membership space where we meet twice a week to practice together and expand our capacity for presence, courage, and intuition. It's a live space, and it is so wonderful and special to be with you in live time and to see your faces and get to share in these meditations together. We wish to create and take part, as All That We Are, in more in-person events where we can meet and transform together. If you have any ideas, please do get in touch to collaborate. One of the things that I've really seen on my journey working one-to-one with energy the past 10 years is how multidimensional healing is and how we carry so much from the current systems, as well as the past and future, and the other worlds. Each of the journeys shared here takes us into the tender and potentially triggering realities of healing trauma, the courageous choices made, and the inspired lives now lived. We explore psychedelics in this episode, which, as you all know, are illegal in many countries. They are not right for everyone, and we are not advising you to take them. If you do feel called, please do it in a safe setting with an experienced guide and get good support, ideally one-to-one, with your integration. You will hear from, in the order that they first speak, Rose Cartwright, a screenwriter and best-selling author. Rose is a writer and co-producer on the Netflix sci-fi series 3 Body Problem from Games of Thrones creators Benioff and Weiss. Her non-fiction book about psychedelics, The Maps We Carry, was published by HarperCollins. Rose wrote a memoir called Pure about intrusive sexual thoughts that became a Channel 4 comedy drama series. Moudou Baqui serves as the spokesperson of the Detroit Psychedelic Society and founder of Per Ankh Sanctuary, an entheogenic church in Detroit, Michigan. Also serving as a national board member of Decriminalize Nature, Moudou has helped organize decriminalization efforts in over 3 U.S. cities, including his hometown, Detroit. He has been a co-organizer of the Detroit Psychedelic Conference. Iyad El-Baghdadi is a Palestinian writer-activist and founder of the Kawakibi Foundation. Known for his work on authoritarianism, liberation, and Middle East geopolitics, he was exiled from the UAE in 2014 and lives in Norway. This episode marks a rare public exploration of his healing journey with psychedelics, specifically MDMA and psilocybin-assisted therapy, in the context of PTSD from years of exile, persecution, and loss. Whilst Iyad often speaks about systems and strategy, here he reflects on how trauma shapes both individuals and paradigms, and how psychedelic healing can unlock deeper integration, resilience, and liberatory possibilities. Shannon Dames is a third-generation immigrant to Canada with mixed European ancestry. She serves as a mum of two, a health professional investigator, a registered nurse for the last 20 years with a doctorate in education, with a focus on resilience development, and a master's in public health. She's a professor of nursing and chair of Vancouver Island University's PAT Graduate Certificate Education Program, and a curriculum research and development lead for the Roots to Thrive program, providing resilience development and psychedelic assisted therapy. Dr. Simon Ruffel is trained in psychiatry, research psychology with a PhD in Amazonian ayahuasca, and traditional plant medicine under Shipibo maestro Don Rono Lopez. He is CEO of Anaya, offering education rooted in indigenous and scientific knowledge, and co-founder of Anaya Science, researching ayahuasca in natural Amazonian settings. Simon is lecturer in psychology and psychedelics at the University of Exeter and chief medical officer of Minds, a nonprofit exploring psychedelics for global challenges. He serves on Chacruna Institute's advisory board. His work bridges Indigenous and Western paradigms, advocating for integrative relational approaches to healing and understanding consciousness. And Akua Ofosuhene, who is a psychedelic guide and healing advocate. She is presented internationally and is on the management board of Breaking Convention. She is based in Ghana and crafts ayahuasca ceremonies using locally grown kapi and chacruna. Her work combines African spiritual practices with psychedelic healing. This work began after her son was groomed into a drug ring. Akua supports parents navigating gang-related trauma and works with individuals recovering from coercive control. She is also the founder of African Spiritual Practices Events. In this episode called Breaking Convention, Psychedelics and the Rise of the Future Human, we explore the question, can altered states shift our collective future? We hope that this episode invites you to deepen your understanding of what is possible and what your healing journey could look like from here, as well as the role that psychedelics can play for all of us. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Tala Oak. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies, to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams, and we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. I am delighted to be here in this circle at Breaking Convention with each one of you, for us to take a moment to really connect to the power of what I'm calling this culture, for want of a better way of describing everything that is part of this movement, which for the most part has a connection to working with certain plants and medicines, psychedelics. But beyond that is actually more of a return to an ancient way of being, as well as a understanding of how we can shape our future. I would love to invite each one of you to share a little bit about you and your journey and your work. What has moved you to feel that this way of looking at the world, that this cosmology is important, not just for you and for your community, but for us as we navigate so much that's challenging. And yet we find ourselves here where there's also so much opportunity. Rose, I'd like to welcome you.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all and to have the chance to connect with you all. So thank you for the invitation. My name is Rose Cartwright. I'm a writer. I write about lots of different things. Most recently, for the past 5-7 years, I've been writing a lot about mental health and psychedelics. And I'm very passionate about exploring the psychedelic renaissance through the lens of critical psychiatry and considering how our movement here can avoid repeating the same mistakes that psychiatry has been making for decades. And I identify several of those mistakes as I see them in my work. Primarily, I'm talking about things like the over-medicalization of reactive stress, the conceptualization of suffering as an individual problem rather than a social problem, the wholesale adoption of the American psychiatric diagnostic system, and much, much more. But what got me to this point, I suppose my answer to that is twofold. It's been an intellectual journey and an emotional journey, and I'll try and weave those two threads together as I talk about this today. So I'll start with the emotional. I have a very long history of quite serious mental health problems, which the older I get, the more I realize that they go deep, deep, deep back down into my past and into my family's past. But they really exploded for me and manifested for me in the most stark way when I was 15 years old. And I was suddenly struck by incessant, devastating, highly distressing, intrusive thoughts about sex and violence and abuse. And they bombarded my mind without exaggeration constantly from that point on for several years. And by the time I was 18 years old, I was self-harming. And by the time I was 21 years old, I was suicidal. I grew up in a Western psychiatric paradigm, and that paradigm handed me a story about what my suffering meant. And I internalized that story and I lived it. And I was told that I had something wrong with my brain and that fault with my brain explained my distress. And as part of that story carried the message that, you need look no further, and that if you change your brain, you change your behavior, then you will feel better, with a set of protocols and a set of interventions. Because I was so desperate to heal, I really gave that my best shot. And I did all of the things. I took antidepressants, I had psychotherapy, CBT, psychoanalysis. Because I'm a writer, I started writing about my journey. I sort of shared that paradigm with the public, became a sort of poster girl for a kind of medical model of OCD and intrusive thoughts. In my early 30s, that all came crashing down for me when I had what I conceptualized at the time as a huge relapse in the intrusive thoughts and the suicidality and the self-harm. And I sort of realized that the psychiatric paradigm had got me nowhere. And I essentially had a sort of a spontaneous mystical experience on a meditation retreat, which was a sort of an opening moment for me when I realized that there was a version of me that existed beyond the insufferable mental pain that I'd been experiencing. That altered state got me very, very curious about other kinds of altered states. And that's when I started my journey with psychedelics. For 5 or so years, I really had an extremely painful and dramatic psychedelic initiation through
magic mushrooms and MDMA and magic mushrooms and MDMA in combination, and later ayahuasca. These experiences blew the doors off everything I thought I knew about my suffering. And every story that I'd been told about mental pain as I've been growing up, I started to conceptualize my suffering as inextricably linked with everything that had ever happened to me and everything that was going on around me. And I moved from understanding my pain as an individual problem to really symptomatic of really deep sickness in our society. Because writing is the way that I make sense of myself, I recorded that journey and I turned it into my new book, which is called The Maps We Carry. Yeah, the book is about my emotional shift, but also really trying to bridge the gap between what I think psychiatrists and clinicians understand about mental health and what the public understands about mental health, and trying to understand why the biomedical paradigm has been so popular and like how we can deconstruct that story with compassion and care and offer people other ways of seeing their distress, ways of seeing that are more relational and ecological and also ultimately more healing. It's very beautiful unfolding for me that, you know, the opportunity to be in spaces like this where you get to open your heart in a very unguarded, undefended way, I think is a sort of extension of those altered states of consciousness. You know, that's why it matters. This is where actually I think the real healing happens. The psychedelic renaissance can so easily just repeat psychiatry's mistake of giving people an intervention and expecting it to change something about their life without the context of their lives changing. And I don't really see it like that. I see psychedelics as a tool to like open our hearts to each other and to the natural world, and that it's actually those connections which make us feel better, rather than whatever's happening at a level of our brain, even though, of course, that's an important level of analysis too. So thank you for listening.
I'll continue in the same context. My journey began on a path of redemption, I guess at birth, being born Detroit, Michigan, to loving parents who did everything they can to insulate me and my siblings from the pressures of the world as best they could. And so as I came up with that love and that support, there were also obvious energies that affected me, my family, and the larger community. And so in that early experience, I was an early version of a child born with alcoholism. And so this was the early demon that we wrestled with through our family from generations. With that, juxtaposed to that were brilliant, loving, extremely successful, outgoing parents. And we were living in the context of the Detroit 1980s, which is massive economic slowdown. It's one of the most segregated places in America. So with this situation, my parents provided the best education they could and everything else. But even then, these energies affected both my home and my community. So the journey began, I would say, early, about 12 years old. My father, who was very much into higher mystery systems, such as the Rosicrucian, began to actively train me about these energies and how they affect the world and how to interpret and engage them as a way to protect me, simply because I had already been made vulnerable through this energy of alcoholism. And so I became actively a student of the mysteries. But at the same time, growing up in an urban environment, I was still subjected to ghetto realities. And so we fast forward 5 years, and I'm 17 years old, and I find myself alone in my house, my mother hospitalized, who almost drank herself to death because 2 days previous, my brother had been murdered. And under the pressure, my father, he just couldn't take it. And so this was a real culmination of these energetic forces. This was the process of me dying. Fast forward a few weeks later, the war on drugs had decided that my little buddies running around, some above ground, some underground, some providing cannabis, some just living their life. Others, they decided to label us a syndicate, a crime syndicate. And so they call us the Ziploc crew, which resulted in the indictment of 28 of my friends, not to mention the death of several others. So this is a collapse of my worldview, a death per se. And so in this path, I began to realize, one, to defend against these or to protect oneself is on multiple levels. It's spiritual, physical, and to work with my psychology, I began to engage community in active community change, election drives, food banks, housing services, the nine, to help counterbalance these community forces. But also to balance the forces in myself, I began to train with my teacher, Kalindi Iyi, who was a profound master of martial arts and also a high master of the sacred sciences of mushrooms and others. My orientation was odd because it wasn't necessarily oriented toward seeking solace or peace, but more so an energetic pursuance of power to change our conditions. And so through the martial arts orientation, I was taught that a lot of these technologies or the sacred plants were not just used for healing, but they were also used for gaining and shaping the reality that you're a part of. And that if you attended to it well enough, when you go into these noumenal states, you can engage these energies, some benevolent, some maleficent, and understanding how to engage them and understanding the cosmogonies could bring real power to your life. So I began to study under him, and like 4 or 5 out of 7 days a week, I'm either training martial arts, cultivating, or in community organizing. And this went on for about 4 or 5 years. In this process, I also reconnected with my root mother culture of Africa to try to reclaim some of those cultural affinities that were lost, coming from a people with no knowledge of self, mores, beliefs, history, values. Part of gaining power back is reconnecting with those. So I began to go to Africa, and I had a series of initiations, the first of which was through the Morite Brotherhood of Senegal. Was a mystic, Sufic mystic brotherhood who basically rid themselves of colonialism through spiritual means. It's a very unknown story. And so I was initiated into their system and given the name Moudou Baqui. And so this was the rebirth. They redefined my focus, my purpose, my vision. And so I began to come back, reborn, to try to build and grow community. So in that, we began a whole space. I began teaching cultivation. I began trying to teach people and also allowing people to come get rid of those things afflicting them. On another level, we focused on high dose, which at the time was considered crazy, 12 plus, 15 plus, 20 plus grams. And a lot of people don't understand why, but the idea was to engage those very energies affecting us. And so between the martial arts and learning with Kalindi and going back to the continent, I was able to attain a lot of secrets, techniques, or whatnot, and it's helped me to transform my life. And so I realized that there was a brother and sisterhood that created globally that existed and from time immemorial. Some call it secret societies, some call it sages and seekers, and that we all were working on an energetic level to bring change as we see it. And so it was a beauty connecting with the larger community and learning about it. So here I am now able to share these gifts, have a community institution, advocate for greater access for my community, while at the same time trying to define what it looks like for my community to engage in this space. And so there's questions of economy versus accessibility, questions of education. So currently, this is where I'm at. I'm figuring out the equation, the geometrics, building community. And so far, it's been powerful. I can't attest this directly to the mushroom, but through our work for like 25 years of underground work, sessions, and exposing and working through community groups. So you have a group that's working on violence. Yes, we would initiate their leaders. Community work on an ecology, we would initiate their leaders. Community working on politics, we would initiate these leaders. And they would go back in the community and provide innovative approaches. So here we are in Detroit, one of the most violent cities considered in the nation. And we witnessed a 60% drop in violent crime. And sociologists are like, what's going on? And so we were able to organize a community effort to put a ballot to decriminalize DMT and psychedelics, and 63% voter approval. So they're like, what is going on here? That's when I became a real believer of unseen energies, because this was a 3-person campaign that was organized over 2 years. And so I began to lean deeper into the understanding that you can go into these realms and you can affect things for the positive. Also understand that people go into affect things for the negative too. This has cemented my appreciation of this work, my appreciation of the people in this work, my appreciation of the knowledge of this work, and my desire to contribute to the overall fraternal or sororal brother and sisterhood that has existed for time millennial. So I see this as a balancing of energies on the planet Earth. If we read the ancient epics, we understand that they are balancing forces, and we are part of that. And part of our job is to help manifest the future human. And when we go into these liminal spaces, this is where we can imagine the future human, the future ideas, draw them down and bring them into the real world. So, yeah, sorcery.
Thank you, Moudou. I hear my voice in your voice, even though we couldn't have come from different contexts. 2011 was when the Breaking Conventions was first organized, and 2011 was a foundational year for me, but also for an entire generation of people from the Arabic-speaking world. It was the year that the Arab Spring Uprising started, but it's also the year that Occupy Wall Street. And I felt like there's something green pushing through. Something is changing. There's an energy under this crust. My name is Iyad El-Baghdadi. I was born in the 1970s, 1977, to Palestinian parents. My father was born in the Palestinian city of Jaffa 4 months before the Nakba, the mass exodus of Palestinians. My mom was born in diaspora. I didn't really connect with how much my father's story, my mother's story, my father basically being carried on a boat when he was 4 months old with seawater splashing on his face to escape, never to be allowed to go back home again, and for their homes to be razed and turned into a public park. So 1977, I'm in the United Arab Emirates. My father is quite a successful doctor in a country which is new. And I'm going to fast forward all the way to 2011, skipping over 33 years. And suddenly, I was a startup consultant / programmer. I like making computer games and cartoons and helping other people start their own companies. So I was not really in this kind of political activism healing space at all. But then there was this moment when suddenly, out of 22 Arabic-speaking countries, 20 of them are having an uprising, and people are asking for pretty much the same thing: bread, security. So the slogan of the Egyptian uprising at the time was Aish, Hurriya, Adala Ijtimaiya, bread, freedom, and social justice. It starts always with bread, but very quickly, within 10 minutes, it turns into dignity. So dignity was this big slogan. And in Syria, the slogan they adopted was death, but not indignity. And I'm faced with this situation where I don't want to say a comfortable life, but I'm living in the United Arab Emirates, which is a wealthy country. I wasn't wealthy by any measure, but I knew that we're going through something historic. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, I didn't have kids at the time. I'm like, if I sit this out, how am I going to explain this to my children? Realizing that there's no protests in the United Arab Emirates, they're not allowed, and it's a very different country. And I see people sacrificing their lives for others in other countries. I said, the only moral thing for me to do is to put myself in as much risk as those people in the streets. And I didn't know how to do that because, again, there's no protests over there. So I took to the online sphere, I went online. In a country which was leading the assault against the uprisings, a country that has a lot of money, and a country that has shown very quickly that there's no lengths it will stop at to make sure that this region does not become democratic. And so I'm there on Twitter at the time with my actual name, with my face, with my picture, even with a geolocated pin. This is where I am. This is who I am. Doing all I can to support the uprisings. I'm fast forwarding now to 2014, and I'm in a jail cell. And being a Palestinian of a refugee stateless background, they wanted me to leave the country, but there was nowhere to send me to. There's literally nowhere for me to go. I remember someone asked, like, what is the phone number of back home? And I'm like, home where? the homes don't even exist. The neighborhood doesn't exist. The city doesn't exist anymore. So I'm in prison for a while. And during this time, my wife at the time, who's currently, we're not together anymore, but we're very close. And she's actually the project manager at our organization. She was 7 months pregnant when I was arrested. Very quickly, I realized that this child is going to have a very different life from mine. I realized that this child, I mean, I wanted to be there for his birth. I realized I'm not going to be in the same country, not in the same room, not even the same country. And I realized that he's going to grow up a refugee like his grandfather. I realized that he will grow up very far away from any concept of home or community like his grandfather. And it just happened that his grandfather's name is Ismail, which in the Islamic tradition is the name of a prophet who was born as a refugee away from his family. And so I named him after his grandfather, Ismail. After my expulsion, I didn't want to be expelled to the country of Egypt, which is where I had a refugee's travel document issued by Egypt. Going to Egypt at the time would have been certain death. It would have been, I would be tortured and I would be disappeared, and probably 10 years later, 15 years later, they wouldn't even know what happened to me. And so I kind of lied my way out of the interrogation, and I got myself expelled. I actually paid for my own ticket to Malaysia. And somehow they agreed, and I ended up living in the airport in Kuala Lumpur for about a month because there was, again, nowhere for me to go. I fast forward again to 2015. I'm in a refugee camp in Oslo, in Norway, near 3 hours to the north of Oslo. I was actually invited to the country to speak at a conference, red carpet treatment, and then 3 days later, I'm sleeping at the police station with a bunch of Syrian refugees at the time. I received my asylum, like my asylum status, my protected status, very quickly. And immediately after that, I start thinking, okay, I'm landing on my feet from all of this kind of rupture, these uprisings. Who else landed on their feet? Because so many people didn't make it. One day before my arrest, one of my best friends fell to his death from the 8th floor of a building. And he just happened to, we did a lot of things together, online mostly. So over the next couple of years, I'm thinking, how do I rebuild? How do we continue this? Because very quickly we realized that we thought that we're just fighting these dictators. And when we realized, no. This is a global system. Again, feeding into the idea of a meta crisis. There's so many broken paradigms around us. We're living in so many limbos. And me as a stateless Palestinian refugee fall through all of the cracks. Standing outside of the system, standing outside looking at it and seeing what those inside the system can't see. However, the idea of rebuilding, I think I was too naive and didn't realize that PTSD is going to catch up with me very, very quickly. And by 2017, it had become a threat to my life because I felt so suicidal that I felt something inside me. This wasn't even a choice. It's not like a plan of suicide. It was more like jump. Something inside me almost wanted to take over my body. And that's when I realized that, I don't want to do that to my son. And I want to make sure that I take care of myself, and that taking care of myself itself is a form of resistance. I came from a culture where you're supposed to deny your own needs and you're supposed to take care of others. Patriarchy is a system which is mostly directed at women, but also requires you to traumatize boys in order for them to become, if you want to run your society as a prison, you need prison guards as well. So that's what led me into therapy. And I was very frustrated by how slow it was. It was CBT at the time. I was lucky enough that I was connected to a lot of human rights circles. And in 2018, I met with Rick Doblin. I found myself sitting with Rick Doblin at a dinner table, and I got introduced to him. And I was very curious about psychedelics. Eventually, he said, yeah, this is something that works. It happens that the third person with us on the table was a man by the name of Jamal Khashoggi. He's a Saudi journalist who was murdered in 2018 in his own country's embassy in Istanbul. Jamal was a great deal older than myself. He was like my father's generation. My father's mental health had deteriorated drastically after my arrest. He just couldn't take it. And, from being this successful cardiologist, he started to show symptoms of dementia. And that filled me with there was the survivor's guilt, but there was this guilt that what happened to me or what I decided to do standing up has affected my family so deeply. They also lost their homes again. They became refugees one more time, and they ended up in Malaysia themselves. So I'm sitting there talking to Rick and Jamal, and I decide, like, Rick is like, the next time you're in the States, and it just happened that I had a visit to the States in a few months, is like, I can get you connected to a facilitator. As it happens, Jamal Khashoggi was killed 2 weeks before I was scheduled to have my first session. He was lured into the embassy of the Saudi embassy in Istanbul. So you can imagine 2 weeks from that, I'm sitting and having my first MDMA-assisted therapy session. And it's love, but it's also rage. And it's almost a commitment that I need to take care of myself so that I can take care of others. Within a few months, and because I'm working very closely on Jamal's case, it just happened that the same people who killed Jamal also had some shenanigans when it comes to, let's say, American oligarchs. So I was part of the team that uncovered this and tried to expose it. And for that reason, around this time of the year, April of 2019, I get a knock on my door from Norwegian intelligence. And they said, you need to come with us. We need to put you under protection because they're coming for you too. So apparently they were willing to kill again. And I ended up under protection for a number of years because I was stateless. And that means, well, let's put it this way. They said, you're a free kill because there's no nation state protecting you. So like if they come and kill you, then it's less of a political price than someone who's like a Norwegian citizen. So I'm under protection. And right before COVID, I managed to get a supply of both MDMA and psilocybin so that I can continue my therapies. Because the funny thing is, during all of this time, this very, very turbulent events, it's also like how it affected my family and the fact that my family, I couldn't see them anymore because I was under protection and they were moved from Malaysia to Canada, etc. Very turbulent events, but at the same time, I was actually improving in every way. I lost the weight, I bulked up, started taking care of myself, I'm sleeping better, I'm a better parent. And so I'm like, if this can transform my life so much in a few months while I'm going through something horrible, what if I do this regularly? Like, what's it going to do? October 2nd, 2019 was the first anniversary of Jamal's murder. And I remember doing a psilocybin trip. And unfortunately, maybe it wasn't wise, but my brain replayed the murder with all the details. And my mind kind of manifested, like I was so pained, but also I wasn't really thinking so much. I wasn't pained for Jamal himself. I was thinking about the souls of his murderers. And what does it mean for this much evil to exist? And I was so distressed that I called out to God saying, can you show me a place without evil? And then I was there, and it was worse than hell. It was the single worst psychological experience of my life, because there was no evil, but also there was no good. There was no pain, but there was no pleasure. There was nothing ugly, but there was nothing beautiful. And there was no meaning. There was no meaning at all. God was this cosmic tyrant now who just created you and then convicted you to exist. And I could see that, my heart was praying, saying, thank you for creating evil. Thank you for creating hell. And as I'm landing, this feeling of fear of evil turned into a feeling of pity. A feeling was like, so sad that there's so much, like, it's so sad that they have to be that. I'm here in Breaking Convention 2025, and I'm marking 1 year since my dad passed. And he passed during the genocide, the Gaza genocide. And he passed a few months after I received Norwegian citizenship and I was able to visit him for the first time. I had hoped, against hope, that maybe psychedelics can help with his case, but I was never, the one thing that healed me, I used to heal others, I couldn't help my father with. And 2 weeks before I came here, I did a session, and I received a very clear message that I've been carrying my father. I didn't grieve him. I was carrying him for 11 years, for 10 years. And I need to put him down. And I need to grieve, because grief is political. Grief is liberation. Grief is the last thing that you do before you rise. And I think there are cultures and practices that do grief very well. This is where the space I'm in right now, which is learning how to grieve. Thank you.
Oh, feeling a lot of that. Really appreciate the vulnerability, the stories, the wisdom. I'm also really grateful to be here. My name is Shannon Dames. I'm from Canada, third generation immigrant. My lineages are mixed European ancestry. I'm in my 40s and I'm really learning how to connect kind of beyond what's felt a little bit like being a bit of an orphan in a land that is pretty new for a lot of us there, and what it means to connect to your lineage and your ancestry. And yeah, I think I'll start maybe with some gratitude. I lived a lot of my life. In my early life, there was a lot of chaos. I spent many decades, good 3 decades, resenting my parents for not kind of giving me stability. I left at a pretty young age. I remember from a very young age just trying to figure out how to survive, how to get through each day, how to make sure I had food, how to stay warm, all the very basic parts of life. And wondering as a kid if something like why other kids seem to have these things and I didn't. And it felt very personal. I want to kind of weave in psychedelics here because I spent many years, and Rose, really resonating with your story. I knocked on a lot of doors, just trying to find answers. Like, how do people do this thing called life? Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Pretty smart, very sensitive kid, very sensitive human. Felt a lot of the world and the chaos and the suffering and not really realizing what was mine and what wasn't mine. It all kind of felt like mine. I'm a nurse by trade. I've been a nurse for a couple decades as well. And I saw it, the church at a really young age. It gave me structure. I really needed structure. It also gave me hope. There was a lot of anxious attachment, like really just gripping onto anything that felt solid. And for a lot of years, that felt really normal. And maybe there's a big gift in that. As I started to maybe become more aware of what healing was, there was also an awareness of how my gripping onto structures was also holding me back and not knowing how to let go, wanting to let go of a lot of behaviors and coping strategies that I knew were not helping and were harming me and were harming those around me. It's kind of like I knew better, but I had this double life of my body doing whatever it would impulsively do to feel better. And then having these moments of consciousness, it was like being two people. I got into leadership positions really young. And mostly because I have a lot of freaking grit and a lot of gratitude for what I went through as a kid and how much grit that gave me as an adult. I know how to persevere. I always get up. Failure has never really been something I've feared. I don't mind the tunnels. I know them really, really well. It's also something that's helped me be in a place of service to others. When you've lived in those tunnels for a long time and you know the way out, you become somebody that can help lead others out. And I'm really grateful for that. My first experience with psychedelics was after I had my 2 babies. I remember I was working in an emergency room when I was pretty young. It's funny how when you grow up in chaos, you tend to go work in chaos because I think there's some comfort there. I did that for a lot of years. And I remember hearing a friend of mine there saying that she had tried ayahuasca, back before I think many people in North America were doing that kind of thing. And after I had my babies, there was this responsibility that I felt to really sort my shit out. And I just didn't know how to do it. And I had tried everything I knew how to try intellectually, had lots of degrees, big jobs, figured out how to get money and how to survive, and was still having this kind of almost dissociative coping mechanisms that I just could not seem to unwind. I left when I graduated from my doctorate. I've studied resilience for many years now, really personally just trying to understand how the heck humans thrive, because that seemed so far beyond me. And what were the basic ingredients. And it's really kind of how I've gotten to where I am today for the career that I have. When I went down to Peru, instead of walking across the stage for my doctorate, I said to my partner, I'm going to go walk across Peru instead. I left my babies, went by myself, was down there for about a month. And yeah, I don't ever claim that psychedelics are a magic bullet. They've never been that for me. What it was, though, is like this, it was like the first time that I can remember of like being in my body. It was like permissive. And there was a lot there, like so much noise, but I could sit in it. I could like be in it. And that was a great gift because like nothing else could get me there. Like, and trust me, I tried everything. And it was like this, like a crack of light came in that I didn't know was possible. I didn't even know that light was there. And from there, it was like the beginning of just expanding that light and like clearing space and learning how to like be in my body and feel safe in my body. And through that little door, connecting with other humans in a way that I didn't know was possible. I've become very good at knowing how to do all the surface stuff. Like I've studied it for years, kind of an outside in approach. So the second half of my life has been learning how to live from an inside out approach. And psychedelics gave me that they've been teachers, connectors. And through that experience, I've been able to connect with other humans and spiritually, even my journey through the church, all that anxious attachment turned into resentment, which I let go, and being able to come back to those old stories and connections from an inside out approach has been like a coming home and like reconnecting to spiritual forces that I did connect to out of fear and obligation that I now can connect to out of love and compassion and gratitude. And I think for me, realizing that what happened with my parents and my ancestors, and there's a lot of tricky history there, it was never about me. I kind of like caught some of the suffering in their stories and in their trauma. And there's a lot of gifts that I now carry, some of their suffering too, but I have a chance to compost what they couldn't. And that also is a great privilege. I will pass some on to my kids. I have no doubt that's how it goes. And I will also give them hope and light, and I will teach them how to compost what I can't, so they can. And that really, that crack of light, starting with ayahuasca, I'm really grateful for it. It set me, it was like a beginning to a pathway. I just didn't know how else I didn't have any other way to access. Yeah. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If this conversation is stirring something in you, that beautiful restlessness that whispers, there is another way, then you're exactly who the rhythm is for. It's our weekly membership where the future is woven through breath, stillness, and energy work. We gather live so we can see each other's faces and truly be with one another. If you're walking an unlinear path and want to root deeper into your intuition, power, and presence, come into the rhythm. This show is ad-free, algorithm-free, and full of soul, and it's kept alive by people like you. This is for the quiet rebels, the rhythm makers, the ones who know another way is already here, and you are invited. Join at allthatweare.org and explore other ways to get involved through beautiful leadership mentoring, our live retreats, and the full course library. And now, back to the episode.
Thanks, everyone, so much for your shares. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here with each of you. Thank you all so much. So I started off my career as a psychiatrist. So I'm a psychiatrist by background. But when I first started working in psychiatry, I actually loved it. I actually loved everything about it. I loved the patients. I found it fascinating. I loved learning about the mind. I found it infinitely complex and infinitely interesting. And when the mind supposedly went wrong, quote unquote, went wrong, what was that? How do we fix that? It's amazing. But there was just one issue with that, and that was that most people didn't get any better, which was a major issue, especially when it came to pharmacological treatments. And that was something that I really, really struggled with. And I'm not the only one. There are many other psychiatrists that feel this way. The pharmacological treatments just aren't any good. And so I ended up taking some time out from medicine. And to be completely honest, I don't really know what I was looking for. I was just looking for something. And through a stroke of, I guess, fate, I now come to think of it, I found myself sitting in a cafe in Guatemala next to somebody who was training in Shipibo curanderismo, Shipibo shamanism. And he started telling me about his work with ayahuasca and telling me that many of the conditions that I was struggling to treat in my own patients back home could be treated by ayahuasca, and that he was doing that. And what's more, he was doing it by speaking to spirits and asking them to treat his patients, and that he could show me how to do that if I went with him. So I went down to Peru. I had my first experience with ayahuasca, which was great, but it definitely didn't transform everything in my life. I actually found myself calling one of my best friends, who's a psychologist, and saying, it's amazing. There's barely any research into ayahuasca. There's some research looking at the scientific use of ayahuasca in syncretic Christian churches in Brazil, but there's pretty much nothing looking at ayahuasca in traditional shamanic contexts. And I remember saying, I think this could be a really, really good treatment for depression, which is quite funny to look back at now. And so I enthusiastically tried to get some funding for some research, and failed miserably. This was 2015, and nobody was interested. Ended up self-funding that first study looking at ayahuasca and personality, which surprisingly did quite well and got a fair amount of attention. And on the back of that, ended up getting some funding from the UK government, from the Medical Research Council, to look at the impact of ayahuasca on epigenetic change. So the way that our genes are affected by our environment and how that could be passed down through generations, as well as other mental health conditions as well. And during that time, when I was doing that research, by this point, it was 2019, and I've been going back and forward to the Amazon rainforest for a good 4 years. And I've been working closely with one particular Shipibo maestro, Don Rono Lopez. And I was having all of these experiences in ceremonies. And Rono was telling me, this is fantastic. This is interaction with spirits. The reason you're seeing all these things, these are spirits, and they're trying to communicate with you. And I was desperately trying to fit these experiences into a Western framework. And it was getting harder and harder to do that. And I was saying to Rono, well, actually, Maestro, I think you'll find that the reason I keep seeing these faces is because the brain is an expert predictive mechanism and we're programmed to see faces. So that's why I keep seeing them in ceremonies. Thank you very much. And he would just look at me and he'd be like, no, Simon. Anyway, and that continued until in 2019, Rono got into a shamanic feud with another curandero, another shaman, who is in a nearby village, which is super common in the Peruvian Amazon. And I had my first experience of brujeria, of witchcraft. And this rival curandero assumed that I was Rono's apprentice. I wasn't. I was just there I was there doing my PhD into ayahuasca and ayahuasca in the Amazon. And he ended up cursing me to get to Rono, to try, that's quite a common thing. You just curse the maestro's apprentice. And so I didn't believe in any of this stuff. I didn't believe in witchcraft. I didn't believe in brujeria. And I went into ceremony and just had a full-on demonic attack, and just couldn't believe what was happening. And I was leading a research program with other researchers on a UK government grant, looking at not just research, but kind of research into genetics. Is the most hardcore scientific research that you could have. And I came out of that ceremony, spoke to the other researchers, and were like, I just got attacked. I just got attacked by a demon. And they obviously were like, what the hell are you talking about? This is not a thing. And so I had a few days where I was under the influence of this demon. It was the most bizarre thing that no longer the most bizarre thing, but at the time it was the most bizarre thing. My whole posture changed. I was hunched over. It was like literally like something was sitting on my shoulders. Interesting to look at kind of medieval work and medieval artwork of kind of demonic possession. I suddenly had crippling anxiety. I couldn't come out of my tambo of my hut. I couldn't speak to anyone. I was a shell of who I was. And Rono was saying, just come back and I'll remove this demon from you. It's not a big deal. I was like, okay. So I went back into ceremony. It was absolutely terrified. And Rono started singing Icaros to me, and like a sucker on a car that you used to stick your mobile phone onto the window, 3, as I now know, darts went and just popped out of me. Everything came back to normal and the demons were gone. After that ceremony, I went to go and speak to Rono about it. And he was like, oh, yeah, just forget that ever happened. And I was like, forget that ever happened. You've literally transformed my perception of reality overnight. Like I don't even know what to make of this, but I did know what to make of it. I started training in Shipibo Curanderismo the next week. That was 2019, and I've continued training in that quite seriously for the last 6 years. But so I had to finish off my PhD and come back I was working at King's College London as a mainstream psychiatrist, and had the worst ontological shock I think I've ever come across, where I was trying to fit what I had now learned into my current practice, into my current framework. And I would occasionally pluck up the courage to say to some of the other psychiatrists, do you think there's any chance that these things in the jungle, this could be real? And they would just go, oh, that's Simon, and give me the same response that Rono used to, of this, oh, Simon. But that completely transformed my perception of health and of healing, of science, and actually of life in general. And so I changed the focus of my organization, which is called Onaya, to try and be that bridge between the worlds. Onaya means doctor loosely in Shipibo. And we started designing the research in collaboration with the curanderos, designing the projects together to answer the questions that they thought were important, that they wanted to answer, interpreting the results together in a collaborative way, making sure that all of that information could make its way out to the Shipibo communities and other indigenous peoples that we were working with. And then fast forward a few years of doing that, we're now working on a new project called the Indigenous Knowledge and Science Initiative, or ICSI for short, which is trying to not just work with one indigenous lineage, the Shipibo lineage that I've been training in, but actually to work with larger groups of indigenous peoples, largely in response to, in 2023, in psychedelic science, Benki got up, an indigenous Ashaninka leader, who's very well known, and said, it's fantastic that you Westerners are taking an interest in our medicines, in psychedelics. You think that you need to support us, but we're here to support you because you're new to this field and you don't know what you're doing. Don't leave us out of the conversation. And so the ICSI project is a group of scientists who are responding to that, saying we are here to work with you from the beginning. And not just with Benki, but with indigenous peoples as a whole. And that means taking science off its pedestal. That means putting science in an equal footing to indigenous knowledge and stripping everything back, all of the concepts that we have. So even things like consciousness, that's a Western concept. That's something that we put onto indigenous peoples, and stripping it back to see what happens when we both create a new kind of science together. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'd like to say thank you for this beautiful circle. My name is Akua Ofosuhene. I'm a mum and a psychedelic guide. I came to the medicine 8-9 years ago. Before then, I always think it's important to say that I'd met some of the medicines, as you do growing up in the 90s MDMA, ecstasy, acid, cocaine, cannabis, and just enjoyed all these compounds and plants and had really nice expanded experiences with friends. But I actually remember the weekend I realized I was pregnant. I was at WOMAD Festival and my clothes that I'd worn on the Tuesday didn't fit me on the Monday. And I thought, hang on, I actually haven't had a period for ages. Let me go and get a test. And I got the test and I was pregnant. And I made a conscious decision, right? No more drugs, no more alcohol. I'm going to be a mum. I'm going to be this new person. And I loved the decision. But my son grew up and life changes so much, I think, once you start working with the medicines. So I remember when I was told I was having a boy, and my sister and I, without even looking at each other, our bodies tensed. And there was this thing that we both felt, he cannot grow up in this country. It was like I knew he shouldn't. And so the plan was in place really quickly. I'm going to get out of the UK. And we managed it when he was 8. Then my mum got sick and we came back when he was 13 and I forgot the plan. And I always think it would have been really interesting. What would I have done if I'd remembered this feeling of we can't stay here? And within a year, he'd gone from being this amazing, clever kid who everyone thought was genius to failing in every subject. And eventually we found out he was involved in drug dealing, that there's this thing, I'm sure it exists in other countries, but here they call it county lines, where they take children to other counties. And that was very distressing because police in the different counties just want to bring the kids back because they don't want to have to deal with prosecuting them. But that's what eventually led me to psychedelics, because I kept on looking online for something that would help me fast. I needed the speed. And from tapping, which was brilliant, emotional freedom technique, self-inquiry, nonviolent communication, Byron Katie's The Work, all of these things led to Cambo. And then eventually I was able to find Iboga. And I always say it felt like I became this dragon mum who could deal with stuff, and I found magic mushrooms. The first person I went to listen to was Darren, and it felt Darren the Baron, Darren Springer. And even kind of finding him talking about psychedelics felt like this underground thing, because I was trying to find something that felt authentic to my culture. And I remember this woman saying, there's this black guy talking about magic mushrooms. He's called Darren Springer. And I Googled him and he was talking in about 8 days from that day. Went to hear him and mind blown, discovered the Psychedelic Society, met all these amazing scientists. But I was too scared to ask any of them, how do I get any magic mushrooms? Because I realized all these people talking about this stuff, they're also risking their careers. I'm going to be asking them for drugs. So it even took ages to be able to get hold of any psychedelics. But as I say, Iboga, amazing, magic mushrooms. And eventually I was able to find an amazing book called Psychedelic Psychotherapy by somebody called R. Coleman, something R. Coleman, but it's not his real name. And there was a brilliant protocol in there using MDMA followed by magic mushrooms, used the same thing on my son. And he came out of that story during the COVID part. As soon as the borders were open, he went back to Ghana, carry on using the medicines. I carried on using the medicines as well, mostly magic mushrooms. And everything just changed. I was a dressmaker. I'm no longer a dressmaker. I work with the medicines all the time. And it feels like I was always meant to work with the medicines. I wouldn't wish what happened to me and my son on anybody. But if it had to happen to anybody, I'm glad it happened to us, because for whatever reason, we find ourselves where we are. And as I carry on working a lot with parents, I work with parents more than young people, which always irks me a little bit because I'd love to be working more with the young parents. But I realize that working with parents, it's really difficult, dealing with the shame, dealing with the guilt, dealing with feelings of failure, listening to other parents telling you how well their children are doing, and you stay quiet. All of those things are really like, okay, this is interesting. The ego and all of those things, and seeing the potential of all these amazing young people. But then at the same time, I'm finding in my work, one of my clients recently said to me, we had a trip together, and it was the most uncomfortable trip I've ever had as a sitter, because she was all over me, calling me mama and looking into my eyes. And I can deal with anything coming out of anybody, but somehow this thing was so uncomfortable. And I was thinking, gosh, they tell you about inappropriate behavior. They don't tell you about when it's from the client. And this woman's like all over me. But after her third bout of medicine, her spiritual gifts came through. And one of the first things that she said on the third trip, she was like, "You're mother to all these people, and that's why we're all coming through you." And she was the third person whose spiritual gift has come through. But I kind of don't tell them, because it seems like, it's their business. But also it's very weird. I didn't know this work would turn into this thing. And so now I'm in another interesting place, because I've always known my son has spiritual gifts, which he is not accepting. And so it's like, gosh, this medicine, my line, my family line, my son, this weird circle that I'm still in the middle of, that I can't quite finish the job yet. So I'm in gratitude that I am, through the medicine, bringing through these amazing human beings with gifts. That just the other week, when I was worried about my son, I got in touch with one of them who's now a channeler. And I asked her, I said, "Ask your guides, will he be okay?" And I got all of this message. And then the girl who was mama, I got in touch with her and I said, "Just ask his higher self, is there anything else I need to do as a mum?" And she was like, "Just send him golden light. Do not over nurture, but do not ignore." It's like, bloody hell. And then I sent a message to my brother. His gifts have come through. And he's much stricter with me. But he gave a very similar kind of like, stay back. And he also said that there's some more work that me and my son have to do to really untie this mother-son cord. And so I say all of this to kind of say it's very complex, I'm finding, working with these medicines and what's coming up. But to chime in with what you said, I'm the happiest I've ever been. The happiest I've ever been, knowing that this is my soul's work. And even with losing my mother last year, it's like, she's gone, but she's not gone. She literally is, the wind beneath my wings. And so, yeah, there's something more complicated about life, but just more amazing. And so I can only ever give thanks to the medicine and the human beings who constantly show up these difficult things that we have to manage, and the medicine that shows you that everything, you can go through it, under it, over it, round it, and even death isn't the end. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you to all of you for sharing so openly and so deeply. For me, my parents were both psychiatrists, so I had kind of a unique lens of society and culture growing up, where I experienced that psychiatrists were like as common as milkmen, which are obviously not common now, but they were in the 80s. And I knew an extraordinary amount of psychiatrists. And in the 80s, you could take your kids to work. So I used to hang out and play, cards with the patients. And my dad was also a Jungian analyst, and that happened at our house. And so I grew up really understanding that everyone struggles. And yet in the myth of British society, nobody struggles. And so there's this illusion that we live under, that there's normal people, and normal people can just do life. And then there's like those other people, and there's something wrong with them. And of course, that's not true. And we all struggle, and to varying degrees. We also are in this culture of so much individualization. And so if you're feeling a lot, it's you that's feeling too much, and you need to sort that out. Of course, what we understand is that we're feeling a lot because there's a lot to feel, and we're feeling things that haven't been felt from the past, and we're feeling things that are coming through the future. We're feeling what's not felt in a space, and there are spirits. There is aliveness in the unseen realms. And as well as that, we're also like in a world of toxicity where we've been polluting our rivers and our foods, and for quite some time now, that it's also showing up in our brains and in our microbiome, and therefore in the way that we experience ourselves and each other. There's so much I can share about my own experiences, and I will share this one thing, that Iboga was the medicine that I really first encountered, and was super profound for me in ways that I can't explain, but really just of finding myself in a realm that made more sense than anything else I'd ever experienced, but that I also knew and I had experienced when I was a child, and I had been in that realm, and then suddenly I was back in it in a whole different way, and everything started to make sense. And when I told my dad, who is no longer alive, that I had worked with this African plant medicine, I mean, he was like, that was like incredibly stupid, because he worked in psychiatric units, and he'd seen the worst case scenario of what can happen when people go out of their culture into something else that they maybe don't understand, perhaps with somebody holding that's not benevolent, shall we say, that's some kind of cult leader in some way, and and seeing people have experiences that they can not integrate. And as he and I talked about it, and I was like, well, I started it back like a year ago, and he was like, well, you've changed in remarkable ways in the last year, so you've been lucky, but don't do it again. And I didn't. I mean, I said to him, I can't make that promise to you, but out of respect, I didn't go near any plants for 5 years. Also because I wanted to attune to the subtleties. And I feel that that's what working with any kind of plant can help us to do. Like, it can show us that there's so much more, and it can show us so much more of what we're capable of. And then we can live that, and we're attuned to so much more, and we don't have to always keep going back for more. And so that was a really, really powerful time of integration. And I really feel like integration is such a powerful part of all of this. I don't feel that psychedelics are for everyone. And there are people that have experiences that they can't integrate. There's also like a lot of issues within the communities. And in England, for example, it's an incredibly privileged community that have access to psychedelics. You will come across things like conflict resolution that is really not very enlightened, shall we say, all kinds of things. Psychedelics can also be programmed in whatever way, like not just for healing. I once read an entire book about the terrorist attacks in Mumbai, where the young men came into the Taj Hotel and the surrounding Leopold's Cafe, and they were all on acid, and they'd been trained with acid, and therefore it was like a video game for them. I found that really fascinating when I read that there's a whole shadow, and there's so much that's possible when we kind of enter into that space. And so much of it is about like, what is that intention that we're going into that space with? And like, are we going into it in order to like connect more and to try and find ways to bring more humanity into the world? I'm really interested, and I know we have such a limited amount of time in this, but I'd love to just hear, as we kind of close this circle, from each of you, what it is that you're most excited about, where you feel like there is this possibility for something that can shape our experience of the future and our experience for future generations from psychedelic culture. And with that, like really understanding that we are in this meta crisis, and there are all of these different things that are affecting us, from loneliness to all the wars that we're facing, to the economic crises that we're facing, to the systems of oppression, the intense racism, the patriarchy. There's so much that is holding us at the moment. It's like we're in a pressure cooker. So within that, what do you see as the possibility, and what have you experienced, and what have you seen with clients and through the work that you do that can create some kind of hope and some new pathway?
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's obviously no secret that we're in really hot water as humanity, to put it lightly. I strongly believe that the way that we move forward is through communication and bridging worlds, and bridging Western science and bridging indigenous science. We can spend all the time that we want trying to advance science in small steps, trying to get out of whatever situation that we're in. But if we take science off its pedestal, if we take it off its high horse and we put it at the same level as indigenous knowledge, so we have that respect, we have that open dialogue, I think that we'll move forward leaps and bounds. It's not about putting either one on a pedestal. It's not about putting indigenous science on a pedestal either. It's about listening, and it's about communicating. I feel that we have so much that we can learn from each other. And if we do that, we should be able to accelerate, or hopefully accelerate, and get some kind of answers to help us through this spot that we're in as humanity. You are more than welcome to go to our websites, which are onaya.io, that's ONAYA, or onaya.science, which is our research website as well. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all of you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
At the moment, I feel very hopeful, really, about the world, because the only other times I've known about there being so many people who had spiritual gifts, they've all come from stories from my mum and my older uncles. And they would tell all these stories that sounded quite fantastical, if you like, the tail end of it, because my mum's sister was a Christian healer. So I've known that it is possible for people to have extraordinary gifts. When my aunt died at her funeral, there were something like 160 people in a particular cloth, and they were all children. She'd prophesied to their parents, go and have a boy, go and have a girl, you will have 2 children. And people would come to her all the time who couldn't have children. But, you know, she died a long time ago, and it was like the gift was gone. And so now I'm working with ayahuasca, and these people are coming through, and they've got extraordinary gifts, and they're not all African, you know, they're not coming from these traditions. And somehow it feels like the medicine is almost marrying me with them, because I don't find it unusual that they're coming through with these gifts. And strangely, it feels that they're coming through and they're having to negotiate these things. You know, what do you do when you have a corporate job, but you can also read people's minds? What do you do when you have a corporate job? One of my clients can, and this was a gift she'd always had, but she'd hidden. she'd hidden it. So she grew up being called a genius, but she can put her hand on a book and get all the information. So she was born with that. And now she's the one who channels. How extraordinary it was to be called up by her for her to say, I don't know what's going on, but I can channel. What do you want me to do? And my mum had just died. I was like, get mum. And she channeled my mum. And we'd lost my dad 3 months after my mum, but I didn't want to bring his suitcases in the house. So they were piled up at my front door. And the first thing my mum said to her on the phone to me was, there's a whole bunch of stuff at the front door and it's disturbing the energy of the house. You need to get rid of it. And it was dad's stuff. So I'm seeing this stuff coming through people who do not have these old traditions, but they do have them. Maybe they're just a very long time ago. And it's making me feel that because we live in a world of duality, and if we're seeing that the world is really in super crisis, of course, the other end of that rope is these people who have these extraordinary gifts, which in it is amazing connection. I don't think you can be truly evil when you can feel somebody's soul, when you can see somebody's chakras, when you can see the essence of somebody. You don't carry the same amount of fear about the other if you come from that place and you have those abilities. So it makes me feel really hopeful, actually, about the future. And I don't think it's a future in the way that we think about future, because I can't even imagine what these people are going to be able to do. And I don't think it's just them who are extraordinary. I think this is a change in humanity. So I've got that side. At the same time, I'm working in Ghana with ayahuasca. And there's the opportunity to work with prisoners with less than a year to go of their sentence. And the Christian priest, and I was a bit anti-Christian, I'll be honest, and now my views are being made to change, because actually it's these pastors who are now taking ayahuasca and they want to do all this other work. And so I'm going to be working with them with prisoners. One of the guys was like, and can we also work with the prison officers? And I was like, of course. I mean, I was like, of course, yes. And at the same time, I'm hearing that Ghana is maybe 2 years away from having a cocaine crisis, because the cartels they've saturated Senegal. They're definitely starting to use Ghana. That means they're going to be bribing the police. We have the start of an opiate crisis in Ghana. And I've met some doctors who want to use ayahuasca and iboga, that side. Everything is going on all at once. But in essence, I feel real hope.
I also, just following on that, I think what I try and remember is just this idea of reconciliation, and it can get really complex and big. It really just starts with like connecting with the body, like if just us as humanity, of like connecting with these vessels that we're in that then connect to so much more. Like there's some simplicity in that. We cannot really reconcile with each other across cultures, with spirituality, all the stuff that really helps us thrive as humans, until we really start reconciling with these vessels and refriending these bodies and all the benevolent messengers that are in there, which really requires us to also clear out a lot of the noise that is layered on over years of not tending to these bodies of ours. That gives me hope. I think there is some simplicity in all the complexity, and that feels hopeful to me. We can do that as humans. It's a really good start. And from that place, I think connection to so much more becomes possible. And if people are interested in connecting, I represent a nonprofit called Roots to Thrive. It's about resilience development. We specialize in group therapy. We also work with psychedelics as an adjunct, not as a magic bullet, but as a connection for those, really helping to loosen some of the rigidity that many of us develop over time. And I'm also chair of a post-secondary program in Canada, Vancouver Island University, that runs a graduate certificate program for psychedelics. So, come find us if you're interested.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure hearing all your stories today. It means a lot. So thank you to all of you. I can sum up where I'm at quite succinctly. I take quite a zoomed out view of systems, of the mental health system and of the psychedelic system. The big picture, the conclusion that I've come to is that there's really very little evidence that our mental health crisis is best characterized as a epidemic of discrete organic brain disorders. I think that's got much more to do with the financial incentives of the psychiatric industry than it does with the scientific evidence. I think it's better characterized as a crisis of lost meaning, lost livelihoods, lost community. And building on that, I think part of the solution might be psychedelics, might be altered states of consciousness, might be ecstatic practices, but that actually the experiment that we really haven't run is wholesale social change. I think part of the problem that the psychedelic renaissance is facing is that so many of the thought leaders in this space are not actually paying attention to those more complex social issues, and that psychedelics are just becoming, we've replaced the language. We talk about entheogens instead of antidepressants, but what has actually really changed in terms of like the grassroots transformation to these social conditions that actually cause people to be distressed in the first place. In a way, I think that's an optimistic message because we already have the knowledge of how to heal through community, like deep in our bones. While scientific research will be an important part of the conversation, actually, I think the hope comes from a restoration of essentially a kind of an ancient wisdom. We got this. We know how to do it. So that's me. And if anyone wants to find out more about my work, I am on Instagram, Rose Cartwright. My new book is called The Maps We Carry. Thank you.
When I consider the future and I consider some of our work in these liminal spaces, it's us serving as divine hosts, for lack of a better word. Part of this work involves us creating the conditions that are ripe enough for these energies to come down. And so that's a lot of what we do. It's like being a host and prepping the space, prepping the landing pad for these beneficial energies. And so I see that as essential work of what we do. I'm always optimistic about the future simply because there's no other way. I don't believe in the concept of death. I do believe we can be active agents in this reality we work towards. So as careful stewards of this knowledge and this work, as careful members of a community that hold each other accountable, uplift each other, and inspire each other, I think we can all serve as hosts to prepare the landscape for a better reality. If anyone's interested, I can be reached at Moudou Baqui, MOUDOUBAQUI on Instagram, or at Per Ankh Detroit, houseoflifedetroit.org.
Thank you. I'm going to be faithful to the framing of this talk, this circle, talking about the meta crisis. And I think I hinted to this earlier when I said that it seems that we are at the edge, at the precipice of several paradigm shifts, and we're living multiple limbos. I'm going to channel, since you've invited us to channel our ancestors, and I think it's not only biological ancestors, sometimes it's a spiritual ancestor, and we always stand on the shoulders of giants. So I'm going to channel the work of medieval Islamic philosopher Ibn Khaldun, who wrote extensively about what I now see as paradigm shifts. He talked about it as a generational process. And he talked about how there's a cyclical nature to history. Believe it or not, the Arabic word for state is almost the opposite of the word state in English. In English, it comes from a word that means stable, stasis. Meanwhile, in Arabic, the word is dawla, which literally means circulating, something that circulates. The fact that we're at the edge of so many precipices of change, some might see it as collapse, but others might see it as rebirth. And in a strange way, what gives me most hope is really that so many of these paradigms are at the end of their life. Yes, it might mean crises, it might mean collapse, it might mean the many things that you see whenever you scroll and you look at the news. But beneath all of that is a new cycle that's waits to be born. And we need to be the visionaries, or we need to either be the visionaries or raise the visionaries. And I think psychedelics find its place over here as a revelatory, visionary force that can actually accelerate this process. Since we're talking about hope, I have my own relationship with hope because I'm not very optimistic when it comes to many things. But I have learned through my experiences that hope is different from optimism. You can be hopeful even when you're pessimistic. Hope is the sense that some things are worth it, that there is a concept of right and wrong, and that there's a concept of meaning. So even when I look at Gaza, 27 people killed overnight, when I look at Syria, when I look at Egypt, when I look at the world, Sudan, what gives me hope is this idea that regardless how dark things get, the concept of light exists. In that sense, I'm brimming with hope. To know more about my work, I'm fairly easy to find online, Iyad El-Baghdadi. You can also connect with my team, my chosen family, at kawakibi.org. That's KAWAAKIBI.org. Thank you.
Oh, thank you all so much. It feels like there's so much more I want to ask each one of you, and it feels like we've just opened something, but I also know it's a lot to integrate and to be with. And I would love to sit down with each of you one day for a one-on-one so that we can go deeper. I know that our community listening would love that too, but for now, there's so much to go and explore, from the links that you've shared to your work, and really to digest everything that's been shared here. This is a truly extraordinary time to be alive. It's everything. It's everything. There's so much darkness, and as you said, so much light. Iyad, and I've experienced that myself in my own experience of life, that the more I'm willing to walk in the darkness, and the more that I've had to walk in the darkness, the more that capacity for experiencing light and beauty and love and magic grows. So we can do both. We are both. We're always both. And what it feels is that this culture of psychedelics, however you find yourself drawn into either actually working with psychedelics or even just understanding the way that they're shifting culture and quote unquote Western worldview into something that's more expansive and real and connected and alive, that it allows us to be more resilient, to be more present, and to embody more of what this time is asking of us. If we can do that, then we know that something greater than what is happening right now is possible, and that we can experience a rebirth, and we can grieve what we need to grieve in order to be present for that. Thank you all so much. A deep appreciation for all of you and for breaking convention. Thank you. Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, join our experiences, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast. And so it's made possible with you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership, retreats, and experiences. Share the episode with your friends and do drop us a note from time to time. Please hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so that others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. All that we are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors, and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silos through borders, timelines, or polarity. That in each and every moment, all that we are is here.